The courtroom doors burst open with a sharp sound. A boy of about 12 ran in, his face flushed, his breath uneven, and his eyes filled with determination. His voice broke the solemn silence of the room like a thunderclap. "Release the beggar and I will tell you who the guilty one is." For a few seconds, no one understood what had just happened. The murmurs stopped, eyes met in confusion. The judge, gavel in hand, froze mid-gesture. The prosecutor smiled in disbelief, thinking it was a joke. The boy stood there in the middle of the aisle, a faded blue backpack hanging from one shoulder and a trembling cell phone in his hand. "I repeat," he shouted, "release the beggar and I will tell you who the guilty one is." Laughter broke out in the back. Some reporters looked at each other, others began recording discreetly. The judge struck the gavel hard against the table and demanded silence. No one moved. In the corner of the room, flanked by two guards, the beggar slowly raised his head. His name was Salvador Mendez, and at that moment, though he did not know it, his life was about to change forever. But to understand that moment, one had to go back a few hours earlier, before everything spiraled out of control. That morning, the courtroom had been full since early hours. Outside, lines of curious people and journalists formed. It was the trial of the year, as the news called it. A homeless man accused of stealing a gold watch from a downtown jewelry store. The victim, a businesswoman known for her charity work. The accused, a vagrant with torn clothes and a weary gaze. It all seemed like an easy story to understand. One rich and one poor, one victim and one thief. The audience had already decided who was who. Salvador Mendez sat in the defendant's chair, his hands cuffed, his head bowed, his face showed years of hardship. A gray beard, sunburnt skin, cracked fingers. He seemed invisible, even in a place where everyone was looking at him. Beside him, his court-appointed lawyer leafed through some papers without interest, not even glancing his way. The judge, a bald man with a rigid face, was named Esteban Ramos. He had presided over hundreds of trials and nothing moved him anymore. Across from him, the prosecutor Adrian Lugo adjusted his tie with a smile of anticipated triumph. He had the cold eyes of someone who enjoyed the show more than justice itself. In the audience, the murmurs were a mix of disdain and curiosity. No one doubted the verdict. The judge opened the hearing with a dry voice. "In the case of the state versus Salvador Mendez, accused of aggravated robbery, we begin." The prosecutor stood immediately. He walked with poise, showing a watch worth more than everything Salvador had ever owned. "Your Honor," he said theatrically, "today we will prove that the accused was captured on security cameras leaving the jewelry store minutes after the robbery, that witnesses saw him loitering near the area days before, that he has no fixed address or occupation. In short, he is the perfect suspect." The audience murmured in approval. Salvador did not lift his eyes. He had heard those words so many times that they no longer hurt. What hurt was the certainty that no one would listen. The defense attorney, a man named Ramiro Quiroz, yawned before standing up. "Your Honor, my client maintains his innocence." That was all. No argument, no question, no emotion, just a phrase lost among the papers. The judge nodded without interest and asked the prosecutor to present his evidence. On the screen appeared a blurry image taken by a security camera. A man in a dark coat and cap was running. His face could not be seen. "There you have him," said the prosecutor, pointing at the screen. The same coat, the same build, the same misery. Laughter echoed in the back. The judge called for order but did not hide his impatience. Salvador tried to speak, but the guard motioned for him to stay quiet. When the judge finally allowed him to talk, his voice came out hoarse, almost broken. "It wasn't me. I was just looking for cardboard to sleep on. A man ran by and pushed me. I didn't even see his face." The prosecutor crossed his arms and smiled. "How convenient," he said sarcastically. "There's always another man running, another invisible thief." The audience laughed again. The judge called for silence once more. "Do you have any proof of what you say?" he asked. Salvador shook his head. "I have no phone, no witnesses, nothing."
"I just know I didn't steal anything."
The court-appointed lawyer said nothing. Silence filled the room. The prosecutor continued his speech, mentioning the victim, describing the value of the watch, repeating every detail as if he were telling a story for television. It was more spectacle than truth, but no one noticed. On the bench, the judge took notes mechanically. The watch on his wrist read 10:30. Only minutes remained before everything would be decided. Salvador looked at his cuffed hands. They were the same hands that had once built fine furniture in his small workshop before life fell apart. He remembered the smell of wood, his daughter's laughter in the afternoons, the promise to see her again once he saved enough money. None of that existed anymore. Only the shadows of the past remained, and the shame of being judged for his clothes, his smell, his lack of a roof. The prosecutor closed his folder and said confidently, "There is no doubt this man is guilty. Society cannot continue to allow parasites to live off others' misfortune." Salvador lifted his gaze for the first time. He stared directly at him. "I am not a parasite," he said. "I am just a man who had bad luck."
The courtroom filled with laughter again.
The judge struck the gavel. Silence. But no one truly fell silent. The court-appointed lawyer leafed through his papers without looking up. It was clear he just wanted to finish. The judge announced a short recess before the final resolution. The guards led Salvador to a side hallway. There they sat him on a metal bench. The air smelled of disinfectant and loneliness. As he waited, he thought about everything that had happened, about how people looked at him with contempt, how his word meant nothing. He remembered the night of his arrest, when the police threw him to the ground without a question. He remembered the boots on his back, the voice yelling at him to confess, the camera flashes as they put him in the patrol car. All of it remained etched in his memory, like a wound that never healed. Suddenly he heard footsteps. It was his lawyer peeking into the hall without looking directly at him. "Look, Modes, I advise you to accept the deal. They could reduce your sentence to 2 years if you confess." Salvador looked at him, confused. "But I didn't do anything." The lawyer sighed. "That doesn't matter anymore. Sometimes it's better to lose a little than to lose everything." And he left. When the guards came back for him, Salvador no longer felt fear. He felt resignation. He had learned that injustice doesn't always scream. Sometimes it dresses as routine. Back in the courtroom, people took their seats. The judge resumed his place. The prosecutor smiled with confidence. Everything seemed ready for the end. Then came the sound of footsteps, a boy running down the corridor, the echo of sneakers hitting the floor, a breathless voice shouting from the entrance, "Release the beggar and I will tell you who the guilty one is." The phrase hung in the air like an invisible explosion. The judge straightened. The prosecutor frowned. The lawyer opened his eyes in surprise. Salvador slowly turned toward the door and saw him. It was the same boy who had tried to help him days earlier when he fell at the market, the boy who had offered him a bottle of water and a fearless smile. Salvador said nothing. He just looked at him, knowing that this voice was the only pure thing in that room full of masks. The judge demanded silence and ordered the child to be brought forward. The boy breathed heavily, but his eyes did not tremble. "I have proof," he said, "and I said I'm going to show it." The prosecutor let out a short, incredulous laugh. "A boy with proof. How wonderful." The judge silenced him with a stern look. Salvador watched without blinking. Something inside him lit up again, a spark of hope he thought long dead. While murmurs filled the room, while the judge argued with the guards, while journalists turned on their cameras, Salvador lowered his gaze one last time and thought silently. How much is the word of someone worth who has nothing left? That question had no answer, at least not yet, but he was about to discover that sometimes a single voice can change the weight of the world. The echo of the boy's voice still floated in the courtroom, but the judge ordered him taken out for a moment to restore order. Salvador was led back into the hallway, this time with his heart pounding harder than before. He did not know who that boy was or what he wanted, but for the first time in a long while, he felt that someone had looked at him without contempt. As he waited, his mind drifted far from that courtroom. He went back to the days when his name still meant something. Years ago, when he was still known as Mr. Salvador Mendez, everyone in the neighborhood greeted him with respect. He was a master carpenter at the San Lorenzo workshop, a small family business where he taught young apprentices how to work with wood. He loved the scent of freshly cut pine and the smooth sound of the plane gliding over the surface. The boys admired him because he didn't just teach them how to build furniture, but how to build character. He used to say that a good carpenter doesn't measure his worth by his tools, but by the patience with which he polishes every mistake. He had steady hands and a calm voice. Every piece of furniture that left his workbench bore his mark, a small ink signature that simply read Mendez. His boss at the time was Leandro Paredes, a charismatic businessman who presented himself as a benefactor of his workers. He promised promotions, talked about family, but deep down he only cared about money. Salvador respected him. even trusted him. Leandro often said that without Salvador, the workshop would be nothing. And perhaps he was right, because customers asked for the furniture made by his hands, not by the owner's name. One summer afternoon, fate decided to change everything. A large sum of money disappeared from the workshop, the payments for 3 major orders. Leandro gathered all the employees and locked the door. His gaze swept across the room like a knife. "Someone stole it," he said, "and until that money appears, no one leaves." There was silence. Salvador was the first to speak. "We don't need to suspect anyone. Let's search calmly." But Leandro stared at him. "Curious," he said softly. "You were the last one to touch the box." Salvador froze. It was true that he had locked away the envelopes the day before, but he had never taken a cent.
He tried to explain himself.
But suspicion had already begun to spread like a shadow. Hours later, Leandro went to the police. He formally accused him of theft. The officers arrived at the workshop, searched Salvador's belongings, and found one of the missing envelopes inside his backpack. The scandal was immediate. The apprentices stared at him, some in fear, others in disbelief. "I'm not a thief," he repeated over and over, but no one wanted to listen. Later it was discovered that Leandro had set everything up. He needed someone to blame in order to cover a greater shortage caused by his own mismanagement. Salvador became the perfect scapegoat, a humble man with no influence, no lawyers, and no connections. He was arrested, though later released for lack of evidence. But the damage had already been done. No one would hire him again. Rumors spread quickly. In the neighborhood, they began to call him the carpenter who stole. Mothers pulled their children aside when he passed by. Old friends crossed the street to avoid greeting him. He lost the workshop, he lost his home, and in time he also lost his family. His wife, worn out by shame and poverty, decided to leave with their young daughter, Clara. The last time he saw them was on a cloudy morning at the bus station. Clara, wearing her small blue coat, cried as she begged him not to let them go. Salvador knelt and promised her that he would come for them soon. But he never had the means to do it. That promise still haunted him, like a rusty nail driven into his soul. The years that followed were a slow descent. At first he slept in abandoned houses, then in parks, and later on the streets themselves. He learned to survive by begging for food in markets, by dodging looks of disgust, by enduring the cold with silent dignity. Sometimes someone offered him a few coins, other times only insults. But what hurt most was not hunger, it was being forgotten, the feeling that his name had been erased from the world. One night while taking shelter under a bridge, he found an old wooden board among the trash. He picked it up, cleaned it with his hands, and began carving it with a small knife he had kept from his carpentry days. It took hours, but when he finished, one word was engraved on it: Clara. From that moment, that board went with him everywhere, like a relic. It was the reminder of who he had been, and the hope of seeing her again someday. During his years on the street, he also learned to read people's gestures. He could tell when someone approached with kindness or disdain, when the police were about to chase him away, when dogs would bark at him for no reason. He lived alert, silent, with the eyes of someone who had seen everything. Until one afternoon, fate laid another trap for him. He was walking near downtown when he heard a scream. On the corner, a man was running with a gold watch in his hand. Seconds later, a woman shouted that she had been robbed. Salvador tried to step aside, but the thief shoved him, knocking him to the ground. The watch rolled across the pavement and stopped inches from his feet. When the police arrived, they saw only him, dirty, trembling, with the watch beside him. There were no questions. They handcuffed him and threw him into the patrol car. The story repeated itself. Now, sitting in that courtroom, surrounded by people who looked at him with disgust, Salvador remembered each of those wounds. The judge spoke, the prosecutor gestured, the lawyer remained silent. No one wanted to hear his version. It was easier to believe the story that fit the appearances. The judge asked if he had anything to add before sentencing. Salvador took a deep breath. "Yes, Your Honor. I have something to say." Silence filled the room. The judge looked at him wearily, the prosecutor with mockery, the audience with morbid curiosity. Salvador spoke slowly, with a firm voice, without raising his eyes. "I don't know if you believe in justice. I no longer do, but I believe in truth. And the truth is that they took everything from me, even my name. Years ago I worked honestly, and they betrayed me. I didn't steal then, and I didn't steal now. But it seems that for you, poverty is the greatest of crimes." The prosecutor let out a quiet laugh. Very touching, he said. But tears don't erase evidence. Salvador looked him straight in the eyes for the first time. Sometimes evidence only shows what people want to see, he replied. The judge struck his gavel, annoyed. Enough, Mr. Mende. They forced him to sit down. The hearing went on, filled with empty words and mechanical gestures. The audience was already bored. No one paid attention to what the defense attorney mumbled, a whisper lost in the noise. Salvador closed his eyes. In his mind appeared the face of his daughter. He imagined her grown, perhaps studying, perhaps wondering if her father was still alive. I wish I could see her once more, he thought. Just once. The judge announced that the sentence would be given the following day. Everyone began to stand. Murmurs filled the room. Salvador was escorted out. As he walked, he heard the comments. Poor man, someone said. He surely stole, another whispered. No one knew his story. No one wanted to. In the hallway, before the guards took him back to his cell, Salvador stopped for a moment in front of a broken mirror hanging on the wall. He looked closely at his reflection. He barely recognized the man he had once been. He spoke softly, as if to himself. The truth doesn't need a suit, but sometimes it needs a miracle. He didn't know that this miracle was already on its way, in the form of a boy who had not yet learned how to be afraid. The wind blew hard that afternoon as Tomas Rivera pedaled through the streets of the San Martin neighborhood. He was 12 years old, a faded blue backpack hanging from one shoulder and his hair tousled by hurry. He had left school minutes earlier, and his mother was waiting at home with a hot lunch. He rode the bicycle his father had given him before leaving to work far away, an old bike but cared for with devotion. Tomas was a curious boy, the kind who does not overlook details. He watched the world with a mix of innocence and clarity, as if he knew that behind appearances deeper truths are hidden. That afternoon, however, he could not imagine that a simple ride would change his life and that of an unknown man forever. Turning onto the main avenue, he saw 3 teenagers leaning against the wall of a closed shop. They wore caps and mocking grins. When Tomas passed in front of them, one stretched out a hand and blocked his way. Nice bike, he said with a crooked smile. Let me pass, Tomas replied in a trembling voice. The boys looked at one another. We just want to see it. We are not going to do anything. But when he tried to back up, another shoved him hard. Tomas fell to the ground and felt the bicycle torn from him. Fear rose in his chest like fire. He shouted, but no one seemed to hear. Suddenly, a deep voice sounded from across the street. Put it down, boys. The 3 turned. In front of them stood a man with a gray beard, dirty clothes, and a steady gaze. It was Salvador Mendez. He had been collecting cardboard near the market when he saw the scene. One of the teenagers laughed. Look who is talking. The vagabond. Go beg for coins, old man. Salvador took a step forward without raising his voice. I said put it down. There was a moment of tension. The boys hesitated. Perhaps it was the calm in his eyes or the way he held the piece of wood in his hand, not as a weapon but as a warning. Finally, they dropped the bicycle and walked away with nervous laughter. Tomas stayed on the ground, breathing with difficulty. Salvador came over and offered his hand. Are you all right? The boy nodded, his heart still racing. Thank you, sir. I thought no one would come. Salvador smiled sadly. Sometimes those who have the least are the only ones who stop. He helped him lift the bicycle. One wheel was bent. Tomas tried to turn it, but it would not move. It broke, he murmured. Salvador examined the damage carefully. Nothing that cannot be fixed, he said. Come with me. He led him to a corner where there was an old metal cart filled with rusty tools. There he took out a wrench and began to work with slow, almost artistic movements. Tomas watched, fascinated. Do you know about bikes? I know about wheels, about wood, about screws, and about things that require patience, Salvador replied without stopping his work. In a few minutes the wheel turned again. Tomas smiled, surprised. It is like new. Salvador wiped his hands with a rag. Nothing becomes new, only different, but it will do. The boy studied him with curiosity. There was something about that man that did not fit the picture he had always been given of beggars. He did not ask, did not complain, did not seek pity. He seemed more like a weary sage, someone who knew things others had forgotten. He offered him an apple from his backpack. To thank you. Salvador hesitated a second, then accepted it. Thank you, boy. You did not have to, but I appreciate it. From that day on, Tomas began to look for him. Sometimes he found him in the square, other times around the market. They would sit and talk while the man carved pieces of wood he found among the trash. One afternoon, Tomas brought him a broken lamp. "It has not turned on for days," he said. "My mother says it is no good anymore." Salvador took it in his hands. "Everything is useful if you have patience. Look." He opened the base carefully and showed the boy how to check the wires. "Electricity is like trust," he explained. "If there is a break, the light goes out, but if you repair the thread, it shines again." Tomas watched him closely, absorbing every word. "And how do you fix trust when someone breaks it?" Salvador looked straight at him. "With time and truth. There is no other way." The boy fell silent, thinking of his absent father, of broken promises, of his mother's sadness. That answer stayed etched in his mind like a lesson he did not yet fully understand. As the days passed, a quiet friendship grew between them. They did not need to speak much. Sometimes they simply sat to watch the sunset as the sun hid behind the buildings. Salvador told him stories from when he worked with wood, and how every piece of furniture had a soul. Tomas listened with fascination, feeling that this man forgotten by everyone was wiser than many teachers. One Sunday afternoon, Tomas arrived running with news. "Mr. Salvador, they are going to put you on trial for the watch." Salvador nodded calmly. "I know, son. They say there is evidence, even if there is not." "But you did not do anything," the boy insisted. "No, but when people have already decided who you are, evidence is extra." Tomas clenched his fists. "It is not fair." Salvador smiled with that serenity only those who have suffered too much possess. "Justice does not always arrive when we want, but it arrives." The boy looked at him with eyes full of determination. "I will not let them hurt you." Salvador patted his shoulder. "You are brave, but this is not a matter for children." Tomas lowered his head, but inside he swore he would not stand by doing nothing. Days went by. The trial approached and Salvador was arrested. Tomas witnessed how they put him in the patrol car without listening to his words. He shouted, but the police pushed him aside. He ran after the vehicle until it disappeared among the streets. That night, the boy could not sleep. He lay staring at the ceiling, remembering every conversation, every piece of advice, every sad smile of the man who had defended him without asking for anything in return. Only one idea echoed in his mind. He had to do something. The next day he went to the area where he usually saw Salvador. He searched among the cardboard, the tool cart, the pieces of wood. In the middle of everything he found a small board carved with one word, Clara. He placed it in his backpack carefully, as if it were a treasure. Then he remembered something. Days earlier, while they were fixing the lamp, Salvador had told him that the watch was not his and that the real thief had fled north, behind the warehouse. Tomas had recorded part of that conversation on his phone by accident while testing a game. When he played the file, he discovered that in the background there were voices, a car starting, and someone shouting the name Leandro. His heart raced. That recording could help. It was not clear proof, but it revealed something no one else knew. He spent the whole night thinking about what to do. At dawn, he made a decision. He dressed quickly, put the phone and the wooden board into the blue backpack, and ran toward the courthouse. As he crossed the streets, he felt fear climbing inside him, but also a new strength, a conviction he had never known. He did not care if they laughed at him. He did not care if they threw him out. He only knew he could not let an innocent man be condemned. And so, with the sun beating on his back and his heart overflowing with courage, Tomas Rivera ran without stopping to the courthouse doors, determined to keep his promise. Before going in, he took a deep breath and whispered to himself, remembering the words of the man who had taught him the value of truth. "If someday everyone falls silent, I will speak for you." And with that promise in his heart, he pushed the doors open and shouted with all his strength, "Release the beggar and I will tell you who the guilty one is." The morning of the trial dawned gray, as if the sky knew something important was about to happen. Inside the courthouse, the air was heavy, dense, full of murmurs and glances that had already chosen a verdict before hearing it. Salvador Mendez sat on the defendant's bench, handcuffed, his gaze lost. His face reflected exhaustion, but also a strange calm, like that of someone who no longer expects justice and only waits for pain to end. Judge Esteban Ramos entered on time, with his usual stern expression.
He struck the gavel and called for silence. Prosecutor Adrian Lugo, impeccable in his dark suit, stood up with a satisfied smile. It was obvious he enjoyed the scene. In front of the full courtroom, he began his closing statement in a firm voice, modulated like an actor who knows all eyes are on him.
Your Honor, today we have proven beyond any reasonable doubt that the accused, Salvador Mendez, is guilty. We have visual records, witnesses, and physical evidence linking him directly to the theft of the watch. The prosecutor paused for dramatic effect. Then he asked for a set of photographs to be projected on the main screen. They were blurry images from security cameras showing a man in a dark coat and cap. There he is, said the prosecutor, pointing to the image. That figure is the same as the accused. The build, the height, the coat, everything matches. The judge nodded. The audience murmured in agreement. The defense lawyer, Ramiro Quiroz, merely leafed through some papers with indifference. His defense was more a formality than a genuine effort. Salvador, silent, lowered his head. He knew everything had been decided before it even began. The prosecutor continued. Furthermore, we have a key testimony. Mrs. Natalia Perez, the owner of the jewelry store, declared that she saw the accused loitering around the place days before the robbery. A few sighs echoed through the courtroom. The judge took notes. Salvador wanted to speak, but the guard beside him warned him with a look. The prosecutor smiled. And as if that weren't enough, Your Honor, a glove was found in the possession of the accused with traces of gold belonging to the stolen watch. The judge raised an eyebrow. Was that object analyzed? Yes, Your Honor, and the forensic report shows that it contains particles matching the material of the stolen piece. The audience murmured again. The prosecutor knew that every word was a blow. The glove, of course, was fake. It had been found during a manipulated search, but no one would check. No one looked for truth when the accused was a beggar. The judge leaned back in his chair. The defense has the floor. The lawyer stood, adjusted his tie, and said in a monotonous tone, "My client maintains his innocence." That was all. No emotion, no conviction. The judge sighed. Very well, we will proceed to deliberation before sentencing. Salvador slowly raised his eyes. He looked at the judge and spoke in a trembling voice. I just want to say one thing, Your Honor. I did not steal. I have been judged many times for how I look, not for who I am, but I know my word no longer matters. The judge did not respond. He struck the gavel. The court is adjourned for deliberation. Then came a loud bang on the doors. The sound thundered through the room. Everyone turned toward the back. A boy burst in, running with a blue backpack swinging from his shoulder and his face flushed with urgency. His voice broke the silence with a force no one expected. Release the beggar and I will tell you who the guilty one is. The judge froze. The prosecutor arched his eyebrows with a mocking smile. Laughter rippled through the audience. Who is this boy? A woman asked. It must be a trick, someone else muttered. Tomas was breathing heavily, but his eyes were fixed on Salvador. I repeat it, Your Honor, release the beggar and I will tell you who stole the watch. The prosecutor burst out laughing. What a touching scene, a boy defending his street hero. Someone should film this. Tomas turned to him, fearless. You laugh, but I have proof. The laughter died down. The judge looked at him with curiosity. Come closer, young man. Who are you? Tomas Rivera, he replied, and I know the accused. The judge gestured for the guards to let him through. The boy walked up to the front, took his phone from his backpack and held it firmly. A few days ago, I recorded this by accident. With trembling hands, he played the video. On the screen appeared a nighttime scene. A street, a jewelry store, a car parked in front of it. A man in a suit stepped out of the vehicle and entered the store. Seconds later, he came running out with something in his hand. The camera caught his face just before he got back into the car. It was Leandro Paredes. Gasps filled the room. The prosecutor stood abruptly. This proves nothing, he shouted. That video could have been edited. The judge raised his hand for silence. Let him continue. Tomas spoke in a firm voice, looking at the judge. That man is Leandro Paredes. He was Mr. Salvador's boss. He accused him of theft years ago and ruined him. I didn't know who he was until I saw him here 2 days ago, talking to the prosecutor. The audience erupted in murmurs. The prosecutor turned pale. That's a lie, he said. That boy is confused. Tomas looked at him without blinking. I am not confused. I have more recordings where his voice can be heard. The judge ordered the phone to be handed over. A court technician connected it to the screen. The video replayed. clearer this time. Leandro's face was unmistakable. His voice could even be heard saying, "Hurry up before they arrive." Silence fell over the room. No one moved. The judge leaned back in his chair, his eyes fixed on the screen. Then he turned toward the prosecutor. "Do you have anything to say?" The prosecutor stammered. "There must be some mistake, Your Honor." The judge struck the gavel hard. "I order this hearing suspended immediately. The court will summon Leandro Paredes for questioning." The journalist's cameras began to flash. Some spectators stood, unable to contain their surprise. Salvador remained seated, motionless, trying to grasp what had just happened. Tomas approached him. "I told you, Mr. Salvador, I wasn't going to let them blame you." Salvador looked at him, his eyes full of restrained tears. He could not remember the last time someone had done something for him. The judge ordered the accused to be temporarily released while the video's authenticity was verified. The guards hesitated but obeyed. Salvador stood, still handcuffed, and looked at the boy with a mixture of astonishment and gratitude. The prosecutor tried to object, but the judge interrupted. "Enough, Mr. Lugo. If this video is real, you have much to explain." At the back of the room, the murmurs turned into a confused buzz of voices. The prosecutor's arrogance was collapsing. The press recorded every detail, and the judge's face showed something not seen in a long time: doubt. The boy held the phone tightly, knowing he had done the right thing. Salvador, his voice breaking, turned to the audience. "You did not believe me when I spoke," he said slowly. "Perhaps now you will when a child does." No one answered. Only the sound of cameras and the ticking of the clock on the wall could be heard, marking the end of a lie that was about to fall apart. The scandal erupted the day after the trial. News programs across the country opened their broadcasts with the same image: a 12-year-old boy bursting into a courtroom and showing a video that could change everything. The recording of Leandro Paredes stealing the watch went viral in a matter of hours. Social networks repeated the face of Salvador Mendez with headlines that read, "The innocent beggar, the hero boy, the video that changed a verdict." Inside the courthouse, tension was palpable. Journalists kept vigil since early morning, and cameras pointed at every door. Judge Esteban Ramos, who until then had led a calm career, now faced the eyes of an entire nation. Prosecutor Adrian Lugo, who the previous day had looked so confident, avoided speaking to the press. His arrogant smile was gone. The judge ordered an immediate investigation into the authenticity of the video. Experts analyzed every frame, every shadow, every sound. There was no doubt. Leandro Paredes' face matched perfectly. The voice heard in the recording did too, and the movements of the car captured by another camera on a nearby street confirmed his escape minutes after the robbery. When the official report was released, no one in the courtroom could hide their shame. Salvador had told the truth from the beginning. Upon learning what had happened, Leandro Paredes tried to flee. He sold his house in a rushed deal and attempted to cross the border at dawn. But the authorities had already issued an arrest warrant. He was caught in a roadside motel, using a false name. The news spread through the media in record time. Cameras showed his tired face, his hands in cuffs, the same arrogant expression he once wore when he humiliated Salvador. That same morning, the judge convened a new hearing. The room was packed, but the atmosphere was different. There were no laughs or sneers now, only silence. When Salvador entered, escorted by guards, the audience rose to their feet. Some applauded. Others bowed their heads in shame. The man who had once been branded a thief now stood as a symbol of dignity. The judge spoke in a solemn tone. "Mr. Salvador Mendez, new evidence shows that you had no involvement whatsoever in the robbery. The real culprit, Leandro Paredes, has been arrested and confessed to his crime. On behalf of this court, I apologize for the harm you have suffered." A deep silence followed. Salvador looked at the judge without resentment and nodded slowly. "Thank you, Your Honor. But you do not owe an apology to me. You owe it to the truth." The judge lowered his eyes. He knew the man was right. Prosecutor Adrian Lugo tried to justify himself before the media. He said he had been deceived, that he had no knowledge of the tampered evidence. But the investigation revealed otherwise. He had covered for Leandro in exchange for money and favors. He was dismissed weeks later and faced charges of corruption. The courtroom gradually emptied. Outside on the courthouse steps a crowd waited. When Salvador came out with Tomas, the air filled with applause. Some shouted his name. Others offered hugs. Camera flashes blinded him for a moment, but he only saw the boy standing beside him. Tomas ran to him and hugged him tightly. "I knew it," he said through tears. "I knew you were good." Salvador stroked his hair with tenderness. "You didn't just know it. Son, you proved it." They stayed like that for a few seconds, in the middle of the noise, untouched by journalists, untouched by the world. It was a pure, honest embrace, the kind that closes wounds words can never heal. That night, Salvador was taken to a temporary shelter while his legal situation was resolved. He sat on a clean bed for the first time in years. In his hands he held an envelope an officer had given him as he left the courthouse. It had no sender, only his name written by hand. He opened it carefully. Inside was a letter. The handwriting was familiar, shaky but unmistakable. It was from his daughter Clara. "Dad," the letter read, "I saw you on the news. I could not believe it at first, but then I heard your voice, and I knew it was you. I cried when I saw you, not out of sadness but joy. I always knew you weren't what they said. Mom is gone now, but before she left she asked me to find you, to never let anger keep us apart. I want to see you, Dad. I am in the city of Rosario, at a school where I teach carpentry, just as you taught me when I was a little girl. I hope you read this letter and come to see me. I love you with all my heart. Your daughter Clara." Salvador let the letter fall onto his lap. Tears blurred his vision. He had dreamed of that moment so many times, and now it was real. Tomas, sitting beside him, watched without fully understanding. "Is that your daughter?" "Yes," said Salvador, smiling through his sorrow and relief. "It is my daughter. Are you going to see her?" "Of course, son. It is time to keep a promise." In the days that followed, newspapers ran stories about the case. The story of Salvador and Tomas became a symbol of hope. Schools spoke about the courage to tell the truth, and some communities began campaigns to help the homeless. The entire country seemed to remember, for a brief moment, that justice is not a privilege, it is a right. Before traveling, Salvador visited the courthouse one last time, not to complain, but to say goodbye. He walked through the same halls where he had been humiliated, the same ones where people now greeted him with respect. He stopped in front of a mirror and looked at himself. He was no longer the defeated man who had arrived in handcuffs. He was someone who had recovered his name. Tomas accompanied him to the bus station. "Promise me you will come back to visit," said the boy. "I promise," answered Salvador. "And promise me something too." "What is it?" "Never stay silent when you see injustice, even if the world laughs at you." The boy nodded. "I will not stay silent, I swear." The bus started to move slowly. Salvador watched through the window as the boy waved, his blue backpack shining under the sun. He felt a peace he had not known in years. Hours later, as the bus drove down the highway, he thought about everything he had lived. The betrayal, the pain, the cruel laughter of those who judged him without knowing him. And he thought about the courage of a child who had chosen to believe in him when no one else did. He looked up at the sky and whispered softly, "Justice does not begin in the courts, it begins when someone dares to speak the truth." And as the bus rolled toward the horizon, Salvador realized that though he had lost almost everything, he had regained what mattered most: his dignity, his name, and the hope of once again embracing his daughter. Several months had passed since that trial that had shaken the nation. The streets no longer spoke with anger but with hope. Newspapers had stopped publishing the story every day. Yet in many corners people still remembered the name of the man who had regained his dignity, and the boy who had dared to shout the truth. In a quiet area on the outskirts of the city, a new social workshop opened its doors each morning. It was a small space but full of life. There, among workbenches and the scent of fresh wood, Salvador Mendez taught carpentry to homeless people and young men at risk. At the entrance hung a sign carved by his own hands that read "Workshop Hope." The students called him teacher with respect. Some had arrived carrying the same weariness he once bore, people broken by rejection, abandonment, and prejudice. Salvador welcomed them with a smile and open hands, never asking about their past. He taught them how to sand, cut, measure, but above all, how to believe in themselves again. He would say that wood was like life. It can be splintered, burnt, even thrown away in the trash. But if someone has patience and faith, it can regain its shape and shine. Sometimes, while the others worked, he would stand by the window, thinking about how far he had come since that day in the courtroom. Justice had freed him, but truth had saved him. The sound of a bicycle interrupted his thoughts. Tomas Rivera came in smiling, with his inseparable blue backpack and a folder under his arm. "Good morning, Mr. Salvador," he said. I brought the invitations. The man set his tool aside and hugged him. So it's set's confirmed, right? Yes, Tomas replied enthusiastically. Tomorrow they're expecting us at San Martin School. They want us to tell our story. Salvador nodded. For months now, both of them had been visiting schools and community centers to talk about honesty and empathy. They didn't do it for fame or recognition. They did it because they understood that words can change someone's destiny, just as a single truth can topple a mountain of lies. Tomas had grown a lot in a short time. His voice sounded firmer, his gaze more confident. In every talk he explained how an act of courage can be born even from fear. He would say that everyone has within them the ability to do what's right, even when the world laughs. On the day of the visit, the auditorium was packed. Teachers, students, and parents waited attentively. On stage, Salvador watched Tomas take the microphone. A year ago, the boy began. I believed that stories of justice only existed in books. But I learned that sometimes justice needs a voice, even if it's a small one. That day I was afraid, but I shouted anyway, because I knew it was the right thing to do. The audience fell silent. Salvador looked at him proudly. When it was his turn to speak, he stepped up slowly, with the serenity of someone who has learned to live without resentment. I don't know if everyone here has ever felt what it's like to be invisible, he said, but when no one looks at you, you slowly stop existing. My life was given back to me when a child decided to see me. The people applauded. Some wept. Tomas watched him, his eyes shining. After that talk, they continued visiting schools. Everywhere they went, they left a mark. People began to understand that behind every face there is a story, that no one should be judged only by appearance. Meanwhile, the entire country was debating a new law. Inspired by Salvador's case, it aimed to guarantee fair defense for homeless people or those in vulnerable situations. The project was called the Mendez Rivera Law, in honor of the two who had inspired it. For weeks, the debate was intense. Some said it would change nothing. Others believed it would mark a new beginning. In the end, it was approved unanimously in Congress. The news was celebrated in the streets. Salvador couldn't believe it. He had never imagined that his name would be written into a law, not for having been accused, but for having endured. That night, as he was closing the workshop, Tomas came running in with a newspaper in his hand. "It's published," he said excitedly. "We did it, Mr. Salvador." The man took the paper and read carefully. Then he looked up and smiled. "We didn't stew it, son. Truth did." They stood in silence, watching the sunset turn the sky orange behind the trees. It was the same sky beneath which they had once shared tears, fear, and hope. Salvador sighed. "You know something, Tomas. Sometimes truth needs a child who isn't afraid to shout it, and a man who doesn't lose faith." The boy nodded, treasuring those words as if they were gold. Days later, Salvador received a letter from Rosario. It was from Clara. She wrote that she would soon travel to visit the workshop and wanted to help teach carpentry. She said the students needed someone to teach them not only how to work wood but how to carve trust. When Salvador finished reading, he felt the circle had finally closed. He had once lost everything, but now he had it all: respect, peace, his daughter, and a purpose. The following weekend, the workshop held an exhibition of the students' work. Furniture, carved figures, and repaired lamps filled the room with warm light. In one corner hung a small plaque on the wall. It read, "Do not judge what you see, for you may condemn what you do not know." Visitors stopped to read it, some in silence, others nodding. It was the phrase that had become the workshop's motto, a reminder of a story that had changed many lives. As the audience toured the exhibit, Salvador took the microphone to close the event. "I want to thank you all for believing," he said with emotion. "Sometimes we think the world cannot change, but all it takes is one voice brave enough to tell the truth. There is no small truth, nor weak voice, when one speaks from the heart." He looked at Tomas, who stood at the back, his blue backpack hanging from his shoulder, and he added, "Justice cannot be bought, cannot be imposed, and cannot be begged for. It is built every day, with empathy and with courage." The crowd rose in applause. Music filled the air. The students smiled, and for a moment everyone felt that the world could indeed be a fairer place. When night fell and the workshop was empty, Salvador lit a lamp and sat at his workbench. Slowly, without hurry, he began carving a new piece of wood, enjoying the sound of the chisel. On its surface he engraved a phrase that summed up his life: "Truth does not die, it only waits to be heard." Tomas approached quietly and placed a cup of tea beside him. You know something, Mr. Salvador, he said. Sometimes I think that the voice you kept hidden all that time now lives in me. Salvador looked at him tenderly. Then make sure you always use it to do good. They both smiled. Outside the wind blew softly, as if the whole city were breathing in peace. And so, with the echo of a voice that refused to be silenced, ended the story of a man and a boy who proved that truth, though late, always finds its way. If this story touched your heart, leave a comment with the word justice and subscribe, because here every story is a reminder that empathy can also change the world.